Imagine waking up to the delicate, fern-like patterns of ice on the inside of your bedroom window. Imagine having to find a coin or use your fingernail to scrape a small porthole through the frost just to see the world outside. Imagine the ritual of getting dressed while still fully submerged under a mountain of blankets because the air in your bedroom is so cold you can see your own breath plume in front of your face. This was not some distant Victorian nightmare. This was not a scene from a Charles Dickens novel. This was the normal, everyday reality of winter life for millions of British families throughout the 1960s and 1970s. In an era before central heating became a standard, before double-glazed windows were commonplace, and before modern insulation was considered anything but a luxury, the British winter was a genuine, formidable ordeal. It was a 5-month battle against an invading, relentless cold, a battle fought not with thermostats and smart technology, but with ingenuity, resilience, and an astonishing tolerance for discomfort. Today, we take warmth for granted. We complain if the thermostat dips to 18 degrees, 64 degrees. That generation dreamed of an indoor temperature that even reached double digits. We are about to explore 12 forgotten, fascinating, and sometimes shocking things that ordinary Britons did just to get through the winter. Some will shock you with their hardship. Others will make you profoundly grateful for the silent, invisible luxury of modern heating. Let's rediscover how Britons survived the cold. The modern concept of a bedroom is a place of warmth, comfort, and relaxation. In the 1960s and 70s, the bedroom was the Arctic outpost of the home. The core problem: bedrooms had no heating. None. Zero. The single fireplace or gas heater was exclusively in the living room, downstairs. This meant that as soon as you left the sanctuary of that one warm room, the temperature plummeted. Upstairs, in the bedrooms, the air temperature would often drop to match the outside world, frequently hovering just above or even below freezing. You could leave a glass of water by your bed and find a thin film of ice on it in the morning. And you could, without fail, see your own breath hanging in the air above your pillow. So, how did anyone sleep? The answer was not to heat the room, but to build a microenvironment. Sleep involved constructing a personal fortress of bedding, a nest so dense it became a feat of engineering. Every bed was a careful study in textile geology. Layer 1, the bottom sheet. Usually cotton, it felt icily damp and shocking to the skin upon first contact. Layer 2 to 5, the core insulation. These were heavy, often coarse, woolen blankets. Not the light, fluffy fleece blankets of today, but dense, military-grade wool. A bed would commonly have 3, 4, or even 5 of these, each one trapping a thin layer of air. Layer 6, the eiderdown. This was the predecessor to the modern duvet, but it was not light or airy. It was a heavy, thickly padded quilt, often filled with feathers and encased in shiny, floral-patterned rayon or satin. Layer 7, optional. Many families would add a bedspread or even an old coat on top of everything for just a little more weight. The sheer weight of this setup was incredible. Children would complain they were being pinned down, unable to roll over. You were physically immobilized by the mass of your own bedding, but this weight was essential. It compressed the layers, eliminated cold air pockets, and sealed you into your cocoon. The nightly ritual of going to bed was a high-speed athletic event. You would linger by the living room fire until the last possible second, soaking in the warmth. Then it was a sprint, a dash out of the warm room, up the freezing staircase, into the glacial bedroom. You would undress with frantic, shivering speed and then perform a scramble dive into the bed, pulling the mountain of covers up to your chin. The first 20 minutes in bed were a unique form of agony. The sheets would leach the heat from your skin. You would curl into a tight fetal position, your teeth chattering, waiting for your own body heat to slowly, painstakingly win the battle against the cold fabric. Only after your personal furnace had warmed your small cocoon could you even think about relaxing. Getting out of bed was arguably worse. You were leaving the only warm place you had created back into the 5°C room. This led to a universal survival skill: getting dressed under the blankets. You would lie on your back and, in the cramped, dark space, wrestle your way into your underwear, shirt, and sometimes even your trousers. You would pull the clothes for the day under the covers with you for 10 minutes just to pre-warm them, preventing the shock of cold fabric on your skin. Only when you were almost fully dressed would you brave the final frigid dash out of bed. For those who slept alone, the other side of the bed remained permanently, icily cold all night. Modern duvets and central heating have made this entire experience obsolete. But for generations, sleep wasn't just a rest. It was a nightly hibernation in a fortress of your own making. Forget the modern idea of loungewear, soft joggers, hoodies, or a comfortable robe. In the 1960s and 70s, your winter loungewear was, quite often, your outdoor coat. The reason was simple. The house was a landscape of extreme microclimates. There was one source of heat: the coal fire or gas heater in the living room. This room was the oasis, the base camp. Every other part of the house was the Arctic zone. The kitchen, bathroom, hallways, and all bedrooms were fundamentally unheated. A journey from the warm living room to the kitchen to make a cup of tea was an expedition. You were leaving a 20°, 68°C environment and stepping into a 5°, 41°. You dressed accordingly. It was completely normal to see an entire family living their indoor lives wearing their outdoor coated clothing. Children would come home from school and keep their coats, scarves, and even their woolly hats on for hours. They would do their homework sitting on the living room floor, still bundled up. Mothers would cook the evening meal in the kitchen, wearing a thick wool cardigan over another jumper, and sometimes a coat on top of that. The family would eat breakfast in a freezing kitchen, all of them wearing dressing gowns, robes, and coats over their pajamas. The social convention of taking your coat off when you come inside simply didn't apply, because inside did not automatically mean warm. Layering was not a fashion choice. It was a non-negotiable uniform for survival. A typical indoor outfit for an evening at home might consist of a vest, an undershirt, often thermal or wool, a shirt or blouse, a jumper, a sweater, usually thick wool, a cardigan, a button-up sweater on top of the jumper, a coat or jacket if you were spending time in any room other than the living room. Elderly relatives who feel the cold more would be permanently bundled up as if for an Antarctic expedition. They would sit in their armchair, a blanket over their knees, wearing a full overcoat and often a hat. A key survival accessory was the fingerless glove. They allowed you to perform essential tasks: peeling potatoes, knitting, writing, turning the page of a book, while keeping the backs of your hands and wrists from freezing in the cold air. The idea of wearing your winter coat at the dinner table seems bizarre to us now. But in the 60s and 70s, It was simple, pragmatic logic. The house wasn't a single, warm entity. It was a collection of different temperature zones, and you had to dress for the journey between them. Central heating didn't just warm our homes. It fundamentally changed our relationship with our own clothes. That single source of heat, the coal fire in the living room, was more than just an appliance. It was the heart of the home. It was the sun, and the entire family orbited it in a strict, unspoken social hierarchy. Huddling around the fire wasn't a cozy lifestyle choice, like something from a Christmas card. It was a geographical necessity. The living room was the only habitable room in the house after dark. The ritual of the fire. The fire didn't just happen. It was a demanding, dirty, full-time job. Morning. The first task of the day was to rake out the cold ashes from the previous night. A filthy, dusty job. Setting. You had to then set the fire. Crumpled newspaper, a small lattice of kindling, dry sticks, and finally, a careful application of coal. Lighting and maintaining. Lighting it and getting it to catch was a skill. You had to tend it constantly throughout the day, feeding it with more coal from the coal scuttle. If you let it go out, the house would become uninhabitable within an hour, and trying to relight a fire from scratch in a freezing room was a miserable ordeal. The coal itself had to be physically hauled in from a bunker or shed in the garden, a heavy, dirty job in all weather. The hierarchy of heat. In the evening, as the family assembled, a silent social map was drawn based on proximity to the heat. Pole position, Dad's armchair. This was prime real estate, positioned at the perfect angle and distance to receive the maximum radiant heat. Second position, Mum's chair, or the spot on the sofa closest to the fire. The floor, the children. They would be relegated to the hearth rug, lying on their stomachs to do homework or play games, getting as close to the hot zone as they were allowed. The human rotisserie. A coal fire produces intense radiant heat. It doesn't warm the air in the room. It toasts whatever is directly in front of it. This created a universal phenomenon, the one-side roasting, one-side freezing problem. Your front, facing the fire, would be bright red and scorching hot. Your back, facing the rest of the cold room, would be freezing. You could feel the cold drafts hitting your back while your shins felt like they were on fire. The solution? You had to constantly rotate yourself, like a chicken on a spit. You would sit for 20 minutes, then stand up and turn around, presenting your back to the fire to thaw it out. People would constantly shift their chairs, moving them back an inch when they got too hot, forward an inch when the cold crept back in. All family life was compressed into this 3-meter radius. Meals, tea, were eaten on trays balanced on laps because the separate dining room was, as one person put it, like a morgue. The single, black and white television was positioned so it could be viewed from the key heat positions. Leaving this room was a thermal shock. A trip to the toilet was a fast in and out mission. And the final, dreaded decision of the night, leaving the warmth of the fire to go up to the icebox bedroom, was a moment of genuine dread, delayed for as long as possible. Central heating didn't just warm our houses. It dissolved the forced gravitational pull of the single hearth and allowed families to spread out. In an old, single-glazed, poorly built British house, your greatest enemy wasn't just the cold temperature outside. It was the draft. These houses were built to breathe, which was a polite way of saying they were sieves. Cold air didn't just stay outside, it actively invaded. It poured in under every door, whistled through the gaps in the wooden window frames, and seeped up through the floorboards. You could be sitting in the warm living room and feel a steady, ankle-high river of icy air flowing across the floor. The cold was not a passive state. It was an active, mobile presence. Therefore, every single night, families engaged in a ritual of battening down the hatches. This was the draft war. Weapon number 1, the newspaper sausage. The gap under every interior door was a superhighway for cold air. The standard solution was to take sheets of old newspaper, roll them into long, tight sausages, and jam them firmly into the crack at the bottom of the door. This was done every night, for every door leading to a cold space, like the hallway. Weapon number 2, the sausage dog. For a more permanent solution at the main front and back doors, there was the Say Sausage Dog draft excluder. This was a long fabric tube, often homemade and decorated to look like a dachshund, filled with sand or old rags. It sat as a permanent blockade against the worst of the incoming gales. Weapon number 3, tape and paper. Window frames were a major culprit. You could literally feel the wind blowing on your face through the closed latches. Desperate families would use brown paper packing tape to seal the edges of the window frames. In some cases, they would tape newspaper or even clear plastic sheeting over the entire frame, sealing the window shut for the entire winter. You couldn't open it until spring, but it stopped the draft. The secondary defenses. Every other gap was an enemy. Curtains. Curtains were not decorative. They were a vital piece of insulation. Winter curtains were incredibly heavy, often made of thick velvet or brocade, and frequently had a second, thermal lining. The instant it got dark, the first job was to draw the curtains, creating another barrier between the room and the freezing glass. Keyholes. An old-fashioned keyhole was a perfect whistling tunnel for cold air. They all had little metal covers that swiveled over the hole. Letterboxes. The letterbox in the front door was a gaping maw. It would be fitted with a brush strip or a heavy internal flap to stop the wind from blowing your mail, and a blast of Arctic air across the hallway. Life was a state of constant vigilance against the cold's infiltration. Modern double glazing and insulated frames have made this nightly battle completely obsolete. But for that generation, the ritual of plugging the gaps was as routine as locking the door. The rubber hot water bottle was a winter staple, but it had its flaws. They were famously unreliable. The rubber could perish and leak, scalding you in your sleep. The stoppers could fail, and crucially, they lost their heat relatively quickly, often becoming a cold, clammy lump of rubber by 3 a.m. For a more robust, long-lasting, and low-tech heat source, many families turned to a piece of technology with superior thermal properties: the common house brick. This was a masterpiece of frugality and ingenuity. Almost every family cooked a hot dinner in the evening using the gas or electric oven. That oven, once heated, contained a massive amount of residual heat. To let that heat simply dissipate into the cold kitchen after the food was cooked was an unforgivable waste. So, families would keep 1 or 2 clean bricks aside, specifically for this purpose. While the roast potatoes and casserole were cooking, the bricks would be placed in the oven alongside them. By bedtime, these bricks were fully charged, dangerously hot, having absorbed hours of heat. They would be carefully removed with oven gloves and then wrapped tightly in a thick towel or several layers of newspaper to prevent them from scorching the bed sheets or your feet. This thermal battery was then placed at the foot of the bed, deep under the mountain of blankets. Unlike a hot water bottle, which has a low thermal mass, a dense, solid brick has an incredible thermal inertia. It would radiate a deep, steady, penetrating warmth for hours. It would often still be pleasantly warm when you woke up the next morning. Each child might get their own hot brick. You would lie in your icy bed, your toes like blocks of ice, and press them against the warm, towel-wrapped parcel. It was the secret weapon that made sleep possible. The best part? It was completely free. The oven was already on for cooking. Charging the bricks cost absolutely nothing in additional fuel, but it made an unbearable boxed night bearable. It was the perfect example of heat recycling, turning waste energy from cooking into personal comfort for the night. For us, hot water is invisible. It's a utility. It exists on demand, instantly, and seemingly infinitely from any tap. For many families in the 60s and 70s, on-demand hot water was a science fiction concept. If you wanted hot water for any purpose, you had to make it. And the primary engine of all hot water was the stovetop kettle. Some houses had a back boiler system, where the living room coal fire would supposedly heat a water tank. But these were often primitive, unreliable, and at best produced lukewarm water unless the fire was roaring like a furnace for hours. Therefore, almost every household task involved boiling a kettle. Morning wash. You couldn't just splash your face. You'd go to the cold kitchen, fill the kettle, boil it. You'd pour a small amount of this boiling water into a washing up bowl, a plastic basin, then add cold water until it was tolerable. This was your strip wash at the sink. Shaving. A man couldn't shave at the bathroom sink. He'd have to boil a kettle, pour it into a jug, and take that upstairs with him. Washing dishes. After every meal, you'd boil 1 or 2 full kettles to get enough hot water to fill the washing up bowl. The weekly ordeal. Bath night. The bath was not a daily luxury. It was a major weekly operation, a logistical nightmare typically reserved for Sunday night. It was such a colossal amount of work that many families bathed only once a week. The process was a true test of endurance. You would begin by boiling a full kettle of water on the stove. Once boiled, you would carry this heavy, sloshing, scaldingly hot kettle up the freezing cold stairs to the bathroom. You'd pour it into the cold, enamel tub. It would look pathetic, barely covering the bottom. You would go back downstairs and repeat the process, and repeat, and repeat. It could take 30 to 40 minutes and 6 or 7 kettlefuls just to get enough water for one bath. And the work didn't stop there. To waste all that precious, hard-won hot water on just one person was unthinkable. Therefore, the entire family would share the same bath water. There was a strict, non-negotiable hierarchy. First in, usually Dad, who got the cleanest, hottest water. Second in, Mom, who got slightly cooler, slightly used water. Next, the children, in descending order of age. Last in, the youngest child, who would be lowered into what was by then an opaque, lukewarm, gray soup. But as they'd be told, at least it's wet and warmish. The sheer amount of human labor saved by modern instantaneous hot water systems is impossible to calculate. It liberated households from hours of repetitive, heavy, and dangerous work. In the pre-central heating era, there was a single, universal parenting mantra deployed instantly at the first sign of a shiver. Are you cold? Put another jumper on. The solution to being cold was not to alter the environment, turn up the heat, but to alter yourself, add more personal insulation. Clothing was not a fashion statement. It was your personal, wearable, all-day heating system. Everyone, from infants to the elderly, was encased in woolen armor. The foundation, thermal underwear. This was not the sleek modern base layer of athletes. This was serious, industrial-grade survival equipment. Vests, undershirts. Everyone wore one. For children, it was cotton. For adults, it was often thick, itchy wool. It was the non-negotiable first layer. Long johns. Many men and children wore long thermal underwear, long johns, under their trousers from November to March. The layering system. A standard indoor outfit was a masterclass in layering. Vest, undershirt, shirt for men or school uniforms. Jumper, sweater. This was the workhorse, usually thick-knit wool. Cardigan, a button-up sweater. Worn over the jumper. This was the final flexible layer. Children were dressed like Michelin men. Under their school uniforms, mothers would add extra, unregulation vests and even secondary jumpers, hoping the teacher wouldn't notice. Nighttime armor. The battle for warmth continued in bed. Pajamas were made of thick, brushed cotton known as flannelette. Many people wore bed socks. Thick, woolly socks worn only for sleeping. And it was not at all uncommon, especially for older people, to wear a woolly hat to bed, obeying the logic that most of your body heat escapes through your head. The put another jumper on philosophy was about more than just saving money on fuel. It was a mindset. It accepted the cold as a given, an unchangeable fact of life. It was your personal responsibility to insulate yourself against it. Today, we walk around our homes in thin t-shirts in the dead of winter, outsourcing our personal warmth to a gas boiler and a network of pipes. That generation wore their heating. When the environment won't heat you from the outside, you must heat yourself from the inside. Winter food in the 60s and 70s was not just about nutrition and taste. It was a conscious thermal strategy. Winter meals were, by design, hot, heavy, and dense. The breakfast furnace. The universal winter breakfast was porridge, oatmeal. It was cheap, filling, and most importantly, it stuck to your ribs. A large bowl of thick, scalding hot porridge provided a slow-release calorie burn, acting as a personal internal furnace for hours. Families would often eat it standing near the stove in the kitchen, soaking up the residual heat from its preparation. The main meals, calorie ballast dinners, or tea, as the evening meal was often called, were dominated by dishes that provided maximum calories and maximum heat. Stews and casseroles, beef stew with suet dumplings, Lancashire hot pot. These dishes would simmer on the stove or in the oven for hours, using cheap, tough cuts of meat and root vegetables. The long cooking time also had the side effect of adding a little precious heat and humidity to the cold kitchen. Puddings. This was the golden age of the heavy British pudding. Steak and kidney pudding, suet puddings, like spotted dick, and treacle sponges. These were heavy, starchy, high-fat dishes designed to provide a massive caloric payload to fuel the body's fight against the cold. The Sunday roast. The traditional roast dinner, with its oven running for hours, was itself a heating event. And everything would be drowned in piping hot gravy. Food had to be served scalding hot and eaten quickly before the cold air of the room could steal its warmth. The liquid heat, constant hot drinks. Cups of tea were the lifeblood of the nation. The kettle was boiled constantly. A cuppa wasn't just a social ritual. It was a quick, cheap, and easy way to pour hot liquid into your core, providing an instant jolt of internal warmth. For children, a hot drink before bed was mandatory, not as a treat, but as a vital part of the getting ready for the cold bedroom ritual. Hot cocoa, hot milk, or malted milk, drinks like Ovaltine or Horlicks were standard, designed to warm you up from the inside before you braved the icy sheets. Modern central heating has divorced our diet from our thermal needs. We can eat a light salad in January. That generation couldn't. For them, hot, heavy food was fuel, just as essential as the coal in the scuttle. The winter evenings were long, dark, and cold. Heating the one habitable room in the house cost money. Every lump of coal, every unit of gas on the fire was a tick on the meter. For many working-class families, there was a simple, pragmatic, and economical solution to this problem. Go to bed incredibly early. It was not at all unusual for the entire family to be in bed by 8:30 or 9 p.m. in the depths of winter. This wasn't because everyone was exhausted. It was a simple calculation of comfort and cost. By 9 p.m., the living room fire might be dying down. The choice was stark. Option A, spend more money on fuel, coal or gas, to keep the one room warm for another 2 hours. Option B, retreat to the bedroom fortress, Chakra 1, which, while initially cold, would become your own personal warm cocoon, with your hot brick number 5 for free. Most families pragmatically chose option B. Children were sent to bed first. The parents would follow not long after. The entire household would be dark and silent by 9:30 p.m., not out of tiredness, but because bed was the warmest, most economical place to be. This had a significant side effect. It created long, quiet nights and fostered a culture of reading in bed. Tucked securely under the mountain of blankets, with only your nose and your hands, often holding the book outside the covers, exposed to the frigid air, reading was one of the few comfortable evening pastimes. An entire generation developed a love of reading from these long, cold winter nights, cocooned in their beds. It also meant people simply slept more in winter. 10 or 11 hours was not unusual. This early-to-bed strategy achieved 3 goals at once. It kept you warm inside your bed. It saved money on fuel for the fire. It saved money on electricity as lights and the TV were off. Modern heating and 24/7 entertainment have completely untethered our bedtimes from the thermometer. For that generation, the temperature gauge and the fuel bill were the ultimate curfew. The coal fire was a static beast, fixed in the living room. What if you needed a temporary burst of heat elsewhere? What about the freezing bathroom on the one bath night of the week? For this, families turned to a portable, smelly, and potentially lethal solution, the paraffin heater. These were freestanding metal units, often cream or blue enamel, that burned paraffin oil, kerosene, via a wick. They were a winter lifeline, but they came with a host of problems. The unmistakable smell. Anyone who lived through this era can instantly recall the smell. It was a sharp, oily, acrid scent that permeated the house. It clung to curtains, furniture, and clothes. Some found it nostalgic, the smell of warmth. Others found it nauseating. But it was unavoidable. The danger. These heaters were notoriously unsafe. Fire risk. They were, essentially, a controlled can of flammable oil with a live flame. They were top-heavy and incredibly easy to knock over, especially with children or pets running around. A knocked-over paraffin heater meant an instant, raging fire. Asphyxiation risk. They burned oxygen. Using one in a small, enclosed room, like a bathroom or a bedroom where you had just sealed all the drafts, was incredibly dangerous. The risk of carbon monoxide, CO poisoning, was real and deadly. Fumes and soot. If the wick wasn't trimmed correctly, or the flame was set too high, they would produce a stream of black, oily soot that would stain walls and ceilings. The skill. Operating one was a minor art form. You had to fill the tank with paraffin, which you bought in large canisters from the local hardware shop. You had to trim the wick with scissors to ensure an even burn. You had to light it and carefully adjust the flame. Too low, and it was smoky. Too high, and it was a fire hazard. Despite the smell and the danger, people were desperate for heat. So they used them strategically and with caution. You would place one in the bathroom for 30 minutes before the weekly bath, just to take the chill off so you could undress without getting hypothermia. You might run one in a bedroom for 20 minutes before going to sleep, but you would always turn it off before getting into bed. The paraffin heater was the ultimate trade-off. People willingly accepted the smell and the risk in exchange for the temporary, portable luxury of heat in the Arctic zones of the house. In the war against the cold, the windows were the enemy's front line. In the 60s and 70s, virtually every house had single glazed windows. A single pane of glass has almost zero insulating value. It is, for all intents and purposes, a hole in your wall that you happen to be able to see through. Heat didn't just leak through it, it hemorrhaged. Standing near a window on a cold night was like standing in front of an open refrigerator. Families, therefore, did everything in their power to blockade these giant heat sinks. The multi-layered defense. As mentioned, heavy curtains were the first line of defense, but this was often not enough. Blankets. It was common to hang old blankets, worn-out coats, or any thick material behind the curtains, adding another layer of insulation. Plastic sheeting. The more resourceful would create their own primitive double glazing. They would buy large sheets of clear plastic from a DIY shop and tape or pin it over the entire wooden window frame. This created a trapped air gap, just like a modern double-glazed unit, and was surprisingly effective at reducing heat loss and drafts. It looked terrible, but it worked. The icy consequence, condensation and frost. This combination of a warm, humid interior, from breathing, cooking, and boiling kettles, and an ice-cold pane of glass created a massive, unavoidable problem: condensation. Every single morning, every window in the house would be soaking wet, crying with condensation. Water would stream down the glass and pool on the wooden windowsills, causing the paint to peel and black mold to grow. But in the unheated bedrooms, the situation was even more dramatic. The moisture from your breath, exhaled all night into the cold air, would hit the freezing cold glass and not just condense, but freeze solid. You would wake up to find Jack Frost. Beautiful, intricate, crystalline patterns of ice had formed on the inside of your window. While beautiful, these frost ferns were a terrifyingly clear indicator of just how cold your bedroom was. The ice could be so thick you couldn't see out. Children would use their fingernails to scratch their names in the ice on their own bedroom windows. In deep cold snaps, windows would be frozen shut, the ice sealing the frame to the sill. Modern double glazing, which keeps the inner pane of glass warm, has entirely eliminated this phenomenon. But for that generation, scraping ice from the inside of the house was just a normal part of a winter morning. Why waste precious, expensive heat on a room you aren't even using? This ironclad logic led to one of the most common winter survival strategies: strategically mothballing parts of the house for the winter. Families would concentrate their entire lives and their one heat source into the core of the house, the living room, and to an extent, the kitchen. Every other non-essential room was sacrificed to the cold. The spare bedroom. The door would be closed in October and would not be opened again until Easter. The dining room. If a family was lucky enough to have a separate dining room, it was never used in winter. It was far too cold to sit in. The front room, your parlor. Many working-class, two-up, two-down houses had two reception rooms. The back room, the living room, had the fire and was used every day. The front room, the parlor, was kept for best, for important visitors like the vicar, or special occasions like Christmas. For the rest of the winter, its door was kept firmly shut. These sealed-off rooms would become incredibly, profoundly cold. Opening the door to the spare bedroom was like opening the door to a walk-in refrigerator. You would be hit by a blast of frigid, still, damp-smelling air. The furniture inside would be ice-cold to the touch. Your breath would steam instantly. Families accepted that damp, and mildew might creep up the walls in these abandoned rooms. It was a necessary price to pay for keeping the living room 1 or 2 degrees warmer. If you needed to retrieve something from one of these icebox rooms, it was a commando raid. Hold your breath, run in, grab what you needed, and shut the door as fast as possible, trapping the cold inside. This meant that, in effect, the family's house would shrink for 5 months of the year. A 3-bedroom house would become a 1-bedroom, 1-living-room flat. In the spring, there would be a ritual airing out, where all the doors and windows of the abandoned rooms would be thrown open to flush out the stale, damp air and let the spring sunshine in. Central heating, which warms every radiator in every room, gave us back our entire homes. But that generation had to make a strategic retreat every winter, abandoning territory to the cold and huddling together for warmth. And there you have it, 12 strategies that Britons used, not in the 1870s, but in the 1970s, just to survive the winter. Ice on the inside of the windows, getting dressed under the blankets, wearing your overcoat to cook dinner, boiling kettle after kettle for a single bath, sharing that bath water with 4 other people, going to bed at 9 p.m. because it was the cheapest, warmest option. These were not eccentricities. This was not unusual hardship. This was just normal life. The widespread adoption of central heating, double glazing, and proper insulation has completely transformed our existence. We have forgotten what cold truly means. We have outsourced our survival to a boiler and a thermostat, and in doing so, we have been gifted a level of comfort that our parents and grandparents would have considered an unimaginable luxury. They were a generation forged in a different kind of resilience, a casual toughness born from a life of constant, low-level physical hardship. The next time you feel a slight chill in your centrally heated home and reach for the thermostat, remember this: you're feeling cold at 18 degrees Celsius. They were living, sleeping, and raising families at 5 degrees Celsius, with ice forming on the inside of their windows. And they just got on with it.